Welcome back to 316 Exposure, always controversial, sometimes uncomfortable, but always honest. Please remember to hit the like button and subscribe. If you want instant notifications, ring the bell in the top right-hand corner of your screen.
Donald, you're probably the best known builder, particularly of great buildings in the city. There's a great deal of question about whether or not the damage and the ultimate destruction of the buildings was caused by the airplanes, by architectural defect, or possibly by bombs or aftershocks. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it was an architectural defect. You know, the World Trade Center was always known as a very, very strong building. Don't forget, that took a big bomb in the basement. Now, the basement is the most vulnerable place because that's your foundation. And it withstood that. And I got to see that area about 3 or 4 days after it took place because one of my structural engineers actually took me for a tour because he did the building. And I said, I can't believe it. The building was standing solid and half of the columns were blown out. I mean, so this was an unbelievably powerful building. If you know anything about structure, it was one of the first buildings that was built from the outside. The steel, the reason the World Trade Center had such narrow windows is that in between all the windows, you had the steel on the outside. So you had the steel on the outside of the building. That's why when I first looked, and you had big, heavy I-beams, when I first looked at it, I couldn't believe it because there was a hole in the steel. And this is steel that was, you remember the width of the windows in the World Trade Center, folks. I think you know, if you were ever up there, they were quite narrow. And in between was this heavy steel. I said, how could a plane, even a 767 or 747 or whatever it might have been, how could it possibly go through the steel? I happen to think that they had not only a plane, but they had bombs that exploded almost simultaneously, because I just can't imagine anything being able to go through that wall.
9/11 was one of the most pivotal events in world history. Its impact will be felt for years to come. You owe it to yourself to go beyond the simplified official story. This is an extremely complicated story with numerous players and motives. The 9/11 facts I'm about to tell you do not at all make sense or fit neatly together. It's a story full of espionage, deceit, and lies. But if forces out there are tricking us, they can only exceed if we, the general public, remain ignorant and passive. Much of the best reporting today comes from alternative media, yet many are initially very skeptical. Some of these 9/11 facts are very hard to believe, yet remember that each entry that I speak to you about today is reported by mainstream media sources and can be easily verified by referencing the links that I provided in the description below. Osama bin Laden runs a front organization for the Mujahideen Islamic freedom fighters rebelling against the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. The CIA secretly backs Mujahideen. Pakistan's Prime Minister Bhutto, understanding the ferocity of the Islamic extremism, tells then President George Bush, "You are creating a Frankenstein." 2 attacks take place which involve hijacking planes to crash them into buildings, including one by an Islamic militant group. In a 3rd attack, a lone pilot crashes a plane into the White House. Yet after September 11, over and over, aviation and security officials say they are shocked that terrorists could have hijacked airliners and crashed them into landmark buildings. The Saudi Arabian government is financially supporting Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda and other extremist groups. After 9/11, the Bush administration does nothing to confront the Saudi leadership over its support of terror organizations and its refusal to help in the investigation. A CIA officer in charge of operations against Al-Qaeda from Washington writes, "I speak with first-hand experience and for several score of CIA officers when I state categorically that during this time senior White House officials repeatedly refused to act on sound intelligence that provided multiple chances to eliminate Osama bin Laden." Federal authorities have known for years that suspected terrorists with ties to bin Laden were receiving flight training at schools in the U.S. and abroad. One convicted terrorist confessed that his planned role in a terror attack was to crash a plane into CIA headquarters. Taliban envoys repeatedly discussed turning bin Laden over, but the U.S. wants to be handed bin Laden directly, and the Taliban want to turn him over to some third country. About 20 more meetings on giving up bin Laden take place up until 9/11, all fruitless. An Oklahoma City FBI agent sends a memo warning that large numbers of Middle Eastern males are getting flight training and could be planning a terrorist attack. A separate CIA intelligence report asserts that Arab terrorists are planning to fly a bomb-laden aircraft into the World Trade Center. Within minutes of each other, truck bombs blow up the U.S. embassies in Tanzania and Kenya, killing more than 220. For some time that bin Laden's men were plotting to blow up the two embassies, U.S. intelligence was tapping their phones. A Time magazine cover entitled "The Hunt for Osama" reports that bin Laden may be planning his boldest move yet, a strike on Washington or possibly New York City. On at least 3 occasions, spies in Afghanistan report bin Laden's location. Each time the CIA director says the information is not reliable enough and the attack cannot go forward. A U.S. intelligence report states bin Laden and al-Qaeda terrorists could crash an aircraft into the Pentagon. The Bush administration claims not to have heard of this report until May 2002, though it was widely shared within the government. The head of Australia's security services admits the Echelon global surveillance system exists. The U.S. still denies it exists. BBC describes Echelon's power as astounding. Every international telephone call, fax, email, or radio transmission can be listened to by powerful computers capable of voice recognition. They home in on keywords or patterns of messages. Bush Sr. meets with the bin Laden family on behalf of the Carlyle Group. He also met with them in 1998. Bush's chief of staff could not remember that this meeting took place until shown a thank you note confirming the meeting. A secret military operation named Able Danger identifies 4 9/11 hijackers, including lead hijacker Mohammed Atta, as a potential threat and members of al-Qaeda, yet none of this was mentioned in the later 9/11 Commission's final report. When questioned, the 9/11 Commissioner's chief spokesman initially says that staff members briefed about Able Danger did not remember hearing anything about Atta. Days later, however, after provided detailed information, he says the uniformed officer who briefed 2 staff members had indeed mentioned Atta. The think tank project for the New American Century, PNAC, writes the blueprint for a global Pax Americana. Written for the Bush team before the 2000 election, Rebuilding American Defenses is a plan for maintaining global U.S. preeminence and shaping the international security order in line with the American principles and interests. The plan shows Bush intends to take control of the Persian Gulf, whether or not Saddam Hussein is in power. It advocates the transformation of the U.S. military, but, quote, the process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor, end quote. Ironic that Pearl Harbor was a surprise aerial attack on a U.S. naval base. The military conducts exercises simulating what the White House later says is unimaginable. Hijacked airliners used as weapons to crash into targets and cause mass casualties. One imagined target is the World Trade Center. Another is the Pentagon. A flight school alerts the FAA. Hijacker Hani Hanjour lacks English and flying skills needed for his commercial pilot's license. An FAA official then sits next to him in class. The official offers a translator to help him pass, but the flight school says this is against the rules. Yet despite poor flying skills, official reports later state that Hanjour executes a 330 to 360 degree turn of AA Flight 77 over Washington on 9/11 in under 4 minutes and manages a precision hit on the Pentagon. After the elections, U.S. intelligence agencies are told to back off investigating the bin Ladens and Saudi royals. There have always been constraints on investigating the Saudis. Secretary of State Powell gives $43 million in aid to the Taliban government. This follows $113 million given in 2000. The U.S. introduces Visa Express, a program allowing any Saudi Arabian to obtain visas through their travel agent instead of appearing at a consulate in person. 5 hijackers used Visa Express to enter the U.S. A number of the 9/11 hijackers make at least 6 trips to Las Vegas. These fundamentalist Muslims drink alcohol, frequent strip clubs, and smoke hash. Some even have strippers perform lap dances for them. Egyptian President Mubarak, through his intelligence services, warns the U.S. that bin Laden's Islamic terrorist network is threatening to kill Bush and other G8 leaders at their July Economic Summit meeting in Italy. The terrorists plan to use a plane stuffed with explosives. Bin Laden reportedly receives kidney treatment from Canadian-trained Dr. Calloway at the American Hospital in Dubai. Telephoned several times, the doctor declines to answer questions. During his stay, bin Laden allegedly is visited by one or two CIA officers. A Phoenix FBI agent sends a memorandum warning about Middle Eastern men taking flight lessons. He suspects bin Laden's followers and recommends a national program to check visas of suspicious flight school students. The memo is sent to 2 FBI counterterrorism offices, but no action is taken. Vice President Cheney says in May 2002 that he opposes releasing this memo to congressional leaders or to the media and public. Larry Silverstein's $3.2 billion 99-year lease of the World Trade Center is finalized. Silverstein hopes to win $7 billion in insurance from the destruction of the World Trade Center towers. Attorney General Ashcroft stops flying commercial airlines due to a threat assessment. He later walks out of his office rather than answer questions about this. The U.S. and UN ignore warnings from the Taliban foreign minister that bin Laden is planning an imminent huge attack on U.S. soil. The FBI and CIA also fail to take serious warnings that Islamic fundamentalists have enrolled in flight schools across the United States. Intelligence officials know that Al-Qaeda both hopes to use planes as weapons and seeks to strike a violent blow within the U.S., despite government claims following 9/11 that the World Trade Center and Pentagon attacks came like bolts from the blue. Russian President Putin later says publicly that he ordered his intelligence agencies to alert the U.S. of suicide plots training for attacks on U.S. targets. Israel warns the United States of an imminent al-Qaeda attack. President Bush is warned by U.S. intelligence that bin Laden might be planning to hijack commercial airliners. The White House waits 8 months after 9/11 to reveal this fact. Titled Bin Laden Determined to Strike in the U.S., the intelligence briefing specifically mentions the World Trade Center, yet Bush later states the briefing said nothing about an attack on America. Top counterterrorism expert John O'Neill quits the FBI due to repeated obstruction of his al-Qaeda investigation and a power play against him. He was the government's most committed tracker of bin Laden and al-Qaeda. The next day, he starts a new job as head of security at the World Trade Center. He is killed weeks later in the World Trade Center during the 9/11 attack. Frustrated with lack of response from FBI headquarters about detained suspect Moussaoui, the Minnesota FBI begins working with the CIA. The CIA sends alerts calling him a suspect 747 airline suicide hijacker. 3 days later, FBI Minnesota supervisor says he's trying to make sure that Moussaoui does not take control of a plane and fly it into the World Trade Center. FBI headquarters chastises Minnesota FBI for notifying the CIA. FBI headquarters chastises Minnesota FBI for notifying the CIA. FBI Director Mueller will later say there was nothing the agency could have done to anticipate and prevent the 9/11 attacks. The urgent warning may have been received the night before the attacks, causing some top Pentagon brass to cancel a trip. Why that same information was not available to the 266 people who died aboard the 4 hijacked commercial aircraft may become a hot topic on the Hill. A group of top Pentagon officials suddenly canceled travel plans the next morning, apparently because of security concerns. Former President Bush is with a brother of Osama bin Laden at a Carlisle business conference. The conference was interrupted the next day by the attacks. Defense Secretary Rumsfeld announces that by some estimates, the Department of Defense cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions. CBS later calculates that 25% of the yearly defense budget is unaccounted for. A defense analysis said the books are cooked routinely year after year. This announcement was buried by the next day's news of 9/11. Warren Buffett, the second richest man on Earth, schedules a charity event outside Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. A small group of business leaders attend, including at least one who would otherwise have died in the World Trade Center. Bush flies to the same base that day, where there is an underground command center. Recovery experts extract data from 32 World Trade Center computer drives, revealing a surge in financial transactions. Illegal transfers of over 100 million may have been made through some World Trade Center computer systems immediately before and during the disaster. And what the government describes as a bizarre coincidence, a United States intelligence agency was all set for an exercise at 9 a.m. on September 11th in which an aircraft would crash into one of its buildings near Washington, D.C. 4 war games were also in progress at the time of the attacks. 8:20 a.m. Air traffic controllers suspect Flight 11 has been hijacked. 8:40 a.m. NORAD is notified of a hijacking. 8:46 a.m. Flight 11 crashes into the World Trade Center North Tower, approximately 20 minutes after the controllers lost contact. 8:46 a.m. President Bush later states, quote, "I was sitting outside the classroom and I saw an airplane hit the tower. The TV was on," end quote. Quote, "When we walked into the classroom, I had seen this plane fly into the first building," end quote. There was no live coverage of the first crash on TV, and President Bush was in a classroom reading with children at the time of the second crash. How could he possibly have seen an airplane hit the tower? 8:52 a.m. 2 F-15S take off from Otis Air Force Base. They go after Flight 175. Major General Paul Weaver, director of the Air National Guard, states, quote, "The pilots flew like a scalded ape, topping 500 miles per hour, but were unable to catch up to the airliner. We had a 9-minute window and in excess of 100 miles to intercept 175. He said, quote, "There was just literally no way," end quote. F-15s fly at up to 2.5 times the speed of sound, 1,875 miles per hour or 30 plus miles a minute or 270 plus miles in 9 minutes, and are designed for low altitude, high speed precision attacks. 8:56 a.m. By this time, it is evident that Flight 77 is lost. The FAA, already in contact with the Pentagon about the 2 hijackings out of Boston, reportedly doesn't notify NORAD of this until 9:24, 28 minutes later. 9:03 a.m. Flight 175 crashes into the South World Trade Center tower, 23 minutes after NORAD notified, 43 minutes after air traffic control lost contact with the pilots. 9:10 a.m., Major General Paul Weaver states Flight 77 came back on the radar scope. At 9:10 in West Virginia, another report states the military was notified of Flight 77 several minutes after 9:03. 9:24 a.m., Flight 77 off course and heading east over West Virginia reportedly notifies NORAD. A Pentagon spokesman says, quote, "The Pentagon was simply not aware that this aircraft was coming our way," end quote. Yet since the first crash, military officials in a Pentagon command center were urgently talking to law enforcement and air traffic control officials about what to do. 9:28 a.m. Air traffic control learns that Flight 93 has been hijacked. 9:38 a.m. Flight 77 crashes into the Pentagon, 42 minutes or more after contact was lost, 1 hour after NORAD notification of first hijacking. 9:59 a.m. The South Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. Flight 93 crashes in Pennsylvania 42 minutes after contact was lost, 90 minutes after NORAD notification of first hijacking. What happened to sophisticated military radar systems and jet fighter scramble procedures? 10:28 a.m. The World Trade Center North Tower collapses. 5:20 p.m. World Trade Center Building 7 collapses. Though the media claims fires brought the building down, the building's owner, Larry Silverstein, later recounts the story of the collapse of his 47-story skyscraper in a PBS documentary, America Rebuilds. Quote, "I remember getting a call from the fire department commander. I said, maybe the smartest thing to do is to pull it. And they made that decision to pull. And then we watched. The building collapses. Over 3,000 architects and engineers later claimed that, contrary to the U.S. government's official story, it must have been controlled demolition."
Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
The Air Force sent up planes after the hijacked aircraft. The Air Force won't say. It says they keep about 20 F-15 and F-16 fighters on duty with Air National Guards along the nation's coastline, ready to inspect unknown aircraft entering U.S. airspace. Quote, "We can scramble and be airborne in a matter of minutes," end quote, said an Air Force spokesperson. Some airline pilots are wondering whether the FAA did enough to try to prevent the crashes. 6 air traffic controllers who dealt with 2 of the hijacked airliners make a tape recording describing the events, but the tape is later destroyed by a supervisor without anyone making a transcript or even listening to it. Hours after the attacks, a shadow government is formed. Key congressional leaders say they didn't know President Bush had established this government in waiting. Some congressmen state the administration should have conferred about its plans. Members of bin Laden's family are driven or flown under FBI supervision to a secret assembly point in Texas, and then to Washington, where they leave the country on a private plane when most flights are still grounded. Top White House officials personally approve these evacuations. The 2 black boxes for Flight 77 are found. FBI Director Robert Mueller later says Flight 77's data recorder provides altitude, speed, headings, and other information, but the voice recorder contains nothing useful. Yet they refuse to release the recordings. U.S. military sources give the FBI information that several of the 9/11 hijackers, including leader Mohammed Atta, may have received training at U.S. military installations. 3 hijackers listed their addresses on driver's license and car registrations as the Naval Air Station in Pensacola, Florida. Atta graduated from the U.S. International Officers School at Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama. The media drops the story after the Air Force issues a statement stating that while the names are similar, quote, "we are probably not talking about the same people," end quote. Yet the military provides no detailed information to refute the claims in these articles. The FBI claims there have been 6 hijacking teams on the morning of 9/11. Authorities have identified the teams that total as many as 50 infiltrators who supported or carried out the strikes. About 40 of the men have been accounted for, yet only one person, Moussaoui, is later charged. 5 of the alleged hijackers have emerged alive, innocent and astonished to see their names and photographs appearing on satellite television. The hijackers were using stolen identities, and investigators are studying the possibility that the entire suicide squad consisted of imposters. Yet these same individuals are later officially established as the 9/11 hijackers in the 2004 9/11 Commission report. The Patriot Act is introduced in Congress. The next day, Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Patrick Leahy accuses the Bush administration of reneging on an agreement on this anti-terrorist bill. Anthrax letters are sent to Leahy and Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle on October the 9th. After consulting with FBI and CDC, Iowa State University and Ames destroys anthrax spores collected over 7 decades. On October 25, the White House Homeland Security Director confirms publicly the anthrax letters sent to Leahy and others contain the Ames strain. 13 renowned microbiologists mysteriously die over the span of less than 5 months. All but one are killed or murdered under unusual circumstances. Some of the world leaders in developing weapons-grade biological plagues. Others are the best in figuring out how to stop millions from dying because of biological weapons. Still others are experts in the theory of bioterrorism. The U.S. engineers the rise to power of a former Unocal oil employee, Hamid Karzai, as the interim president of Afghanistan. Looking at the map of the big U.S. bases in Afghanistan, one is struck that they are identical to the route of the projected oil pipeline. Leading structural engineers and fire safety experts believe the investigation into the collapse of the World Trade Center is inadequate. They note that the current team of 20 or so investigators has inadequate financial and staff support, has been prevented from interviewing witnesses and from examining the disaster site. They couldn't even get a detailed blueprint of the World Trade Center. The decision to rapidly recycle the steel beams from the World Trade Center means definitive answers will never be known. An editorial in the respected trade magazine Fire Engineer states that there is good reason to believe that the official investigation, blessed by FEMA, into the World Trade Center collapse is half-baked farce. that may already have been commandeered by political forces whose primary interests are clearly not full disclosure. Respected members of the fire protection engineering community are beginning to raise red flags, and resonating theory has emerged. The structural damage from the planes and the explosive and ignition of jet fuel in themselves were not enough to bring down the towers. A ban on poppy growing by the Taliban in July 2000, along with severe droughts, reduced Afghanistan's opium yield by 91% in 2001. Yet the UN expects its 2002 opium crop to be the equivalent to the bumper 1 of 3 years ago. Afghanistan is a source of 75% of the world's heroin. Why is the U.S. unable to control opium production, which had almost stopped? The 9/11 collapse of the 47-story World Trade Center Building 7 was the first time a modern, steel-enforced high-rise in the United States has ever collapsed in a fire. Building 7 was where the SEC was storing files related to the numerous Wall Street investigations. The files for approximately 3,000 to 4,000 cases were destroyed. Lost files include documents that could show the relationship between Citigroup and the WorldCom bankruptcy. Bush says of bin Laden, "I am truly not that concerned about him." Military Chief Myers states, "The goal has never been to get bin Laden." FBI Director Mueller, "We have not uncovered a single piece of paper that mentioned any aspect of the 9/11 plot. The hijackers had no computers, no laptops, no storage media of any kind. Yet investigators have amassed a substantial amount of email traffic among the hijackers. The laptop computer of Moussaoui, the alleged 20th hijacker, was confiscated weeks before 9/11. Yet FBI headquarters systematically dismissed and undermined requests by Minneapolis FBI agents to search the computer." For the first time, the White House admits that Bush was warned about bin Laden hijacking aircraft and wanting to attack the U.S. in August 2001. It is unclear why they waited 8 months to reveal this. The press secretary states that while Bush had been warned of possible hijackings, quote, "the president did not receive information about the use of airplanes as missiles by suicide bombers," unquote. Yet the August presidential memo left little doubt that the hijacked airlines were intended for use as missiles and that the U.S. targets were intended. A memo is released in which Minnesota FBI agent Colleen Rowley writes to FBI Director Mueller, "I have deep concerns that a delicate and subtle shading, skewing of facts by you and others at the highest levels of the FBI management has occurred and is occurring." CNN calls the memo a colossal indictment of our chief law enforcement agency. Time magazine later names Rowley one of the 3 persons of the year for 2002. No more than 6 of the 19 hijackers were interviewed by U.S. officials before being granted visas. This contradicts the State Department's claim that 12 had been interviewed. Of 15 hijackers, none filled in the visa documents properly. All 15 of them should have been denied entry to the country. Quote, "The system was rigged in their favor from the get-go," unquote. In December 2002, 2 top Republican senators report that if State Department personnel had merely followed the law in Saudi Arabia, 9/11 would not have happened. Though the investigation into the Space Shuttle Columbia tragedy cost $50 million, and the Ken Starr investigation of Whitewater and Monica Lewinsky ran $64 million, the White House balks at increasing funding beyond $3 million for the 9/11 Commission's investigation into the worst terror attack ever. The latest effort to curtail funding has angered victims of the attack. Quote, "The White House decision was another in a long line of efforts to water down or shrink the panel's role." The 9/11 Commission report is published. It fails to mention that a year before the 9/11 attacks, a secret Pentagon project named Able Danger had identified 4 9/11 hijackers, including leader Mohammed Atta. The Commission spokesperson initially states members were not informed of this, but later acknowledges they were. The report also completely fails to investigate the collapse of World Trade Center 7. The fear that Afghanistan might degenerate into a narco state is becoming a reality. Afghanistan has surpassed Colombia as the world's biggest producer of illicit narcotics, heroin being the main engine of economic growth, and the strongest bond among tribes that previously fought constantly. What we have here now is a narco economy where 40 to 50% of the GDP is from illicit drugs. How does a country controlled by the U.S. become the largest producer of illegal drugs? Former FBI Director Louis Freeh, quote, "The Able Danger intelligence, if confirmed, is undoubtedly the most relevant fact of the entire post-9/11 inquiry. Yet the 9/11 Commission inexplicably concluded that it was not historically significant. This astounding conclusion, in combination with the failure to investigate Able Danger, raises serious challenges to the Commission's credibility and, if the facts prove out, might just render the Commission historically insignificant itself. I want to end today by sharing with you an extremely compelling video. And I also want you to make your own conclusions, your own decisions based on your research and the information that I provided.
A little over a year before September 11th, an Israeli art group named Gelatin, which is also coincidentally the name of high-powered explosives, began an ongoing project on the 91st floor of the World Trade Center to add a balcony to one of the floors. You can even see here in the Metro, which is a daily newspaper people hand out like the subways in the morning, they even did a little write-up about it. You have a picture down here of them working with all these boxes stacked around them, talking about the group Gelatin and working on their project, the B thing, which I suppose, according to them, is B for balcony, which I would suggest after these next few slides might stand for something else. Now, if you look a little closer at this picture, it says BB18 on it. Now, BB18 is a popular fuse housing for when you have a million wires and you need to organize them for something. I don't know how many wires you would need to put a balcony outside, but my guess would be 0. Now, one night while they were working on this, they went to a whole bunch of floors and put E-Team, showing that they had access to all these floors, which is exactly where the first plane hit. They lit up floors 90 to 94, and the first plane, or the first explosion, happened on floors 93 to 99. After this was all done, they published a 62-page book about it, which is extremely hard to get, as you can imagine, which includes pictures of them doing it and all about it, and then some of their sketches. Now keep in mind, these are supposed art students, okay? Now I know art doesn't always mean drawing, it can mean many things, but nevertheless, these look like the scribbled out blueprints of a heist or something shady. Here's one with the tower. It says, very depressing inside, very amazing outside. All right, that's weird. We want to break through to the amazement from the inside. Okay, like a bomb breaking out. And it says depression inside, amazement outside. And here's the second sketch of a building basically starting to crumble with debris falling all around it. Now, this isn't shady at all, guys. Here's another sketch of someone jumping out of the Twin Towers. Here's a sketch, and there's a lot of them. The creeper, I'm going to show a few of the towers and then all the lower levels behind it. On the top here, it says, God, bring airplane food. Right next to it says, last chance to open a parachute. If you go down here, it just says a whole bunch of creepy stuff. Highest worm population. All right, so this is a sketchbook which shows a crumbling tower, and it shows the towers here with a hole where their balcony supposedly is, but is where the plane hits. It says, bring airplane food. The only pictures of them are standing next to 100 fuse boxes that are used to rig up things like, I don't know, bombs. Their name is Gelatin, which is a high-powered explosive, and is called the B thing, working on the exact same floors where the first explosion hit. And here's one of the passengers on that first plane, Danny Lewin, pictured in front of what looks like 2 gray towers. Danny Lewin is a former Israeli Special Forces in the division which was in charge of counterterrorism beyond Israel's borders. Now, in this series of pictures, he's wearing a watch called the Hijacker. Danny was seated in row 9 of Flight 11.
Gene, you're saying that you didn't see anything initially. You didn't see a plane actually approach the building.
I had no idea it was a plane. I just saw the entire top part of the World Trade Center explode. So I turned on the TV when I heard they said it was a plane. It was really strange.
So you've probably heard me in past videos talk about math, and I do math all day long, and I'm a mathematician and all that. Well, that is because I am a skyscraper engineer who has been building skyscrapers in Manhattan for 17 years. So I have to say, if there's ever been anything I've been more qualified to speak on, it's the collapse of the Twin Towers. Of course, this is just my personal assessment based on the things I know about skyscrapers, and after studying that video over and over again and comparing it to other research I've done on the matter. Now, first things first, those buildings were tanks. I mean, those might have been the two sturdiest, strongest buildings on the planet. Now, majority of buildings get most of their strength from the core, around like the elevator shaft. That's where the heaviest steel will be, and it'll come up the middle of the building. And it creates like a spine. So this is where most of the strength from the building comes. Now, if you look at the Twin Towers, they were built like that, like every other building. They were also built with an exoskeleton of some of the heaviest steel in any building in the whole city. To make even anything other than a dent, let alone a hole that size in those buildings, you'd have to drive an aircraft carrier into them. A plane like that would just shred itself like paper, would barely even enter the building. The majority of it would crumple and it would just fall down to the ground. I don't care how much jet fuel's on board, I don't care what. Look at this airplane being scrapped here. Look at this thing going through it like paper. They're nothing. They're little tin nothings, these planes. There is no way on earth that thing could blow a hole into the most solid building ever created. So now the second part of this. Let's say on some miraculous occurrence, it does blow that hole into the side. So now you got the top, however many, 10 floors or whatever, about to fall onto the bottom 90. And this is everyone's favorite theory. It says it's pancakes. The building just pancaked. It's like cringe every time I hear that. First of all, that's not even what pancaking looks like. When floors pancake, the horrible occurrence that this is, they stop. They go floor, 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 floor. So look at this video right here. If you can see briefly, there's a lot of smoke. It drops the floor and stops for a second. Then it drops again. So look at this one collapsing. It collapses a floor and it falls over. These are the two most common occurrences with a pancake. Either goes floor, stop, floor, stop, floor, stop, floor, stop, floor, stop, floor, stop, floor, stop. Or it hits a floor and then falls over. The only thing that would have ever happened with those buildings, a steel building no less, so pancaking usually happens with a reinforced concrete building, not a steel building in the first place. But the only thing that would have happened is that it would either the top would have dropped the floor, dropped the floor, dropped the floor, dropped the floor, and you would have seen it in a horribly slow fashion, and eventually would have just hit the ground. Or what would have most likely happened, it would have fell a floor and the whole top would have fell off onto the street. But neither of those things did happen, did it? No, it free fell. There's only one thing on earth that can make a building free fall perfectly into its own footprint, and that's controlled demolition. Period. It's not even up for debate. And then World Trade Center 7, which everyone wants to dismiss. Meanwhile, this is a building that would be one of the tallest buildings, if not the tallest building in most of the states in America. It's like an afterthought. Didn't have a hole in it where the top floor could have pancaked. No, it had fire. It had fire debris supposedly inside. The fires weakened it. And did it start to crumble from the fire? No. Did it fall over? No. Did it pancake? Obviously not. It also fell in free fall speed, perfectly into its footprint. I mean, how are we still even talking about this 18 years later? Furthermore, if you look into 7, you can see this video where the squibs are popping. It's exactly what happens to the controlled demolition. That's them. They cut the inside beams and then they have bombs to go off one by one. And you can see them blowing out the windows of the building as they're exploding, first collapsing everything, and then it falls. Also, you have Silverstein in this interview saying that he gave the order to pull it, which is the only terminology for pull it is a controlled demolition. Okay, pull it, and then they hit the thing and it collapses.
Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
So then you have this news station reporting it as collapsed already, so clearly they knew what was going on, when it's right behind her. That's it. That's the Salomon Brothers building, or World Trade 7.
Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. As you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears to be still burning. We see these huge clouds of smoke and ash, and we know that behind that there's an empty piece of what was a very familiar New York skyline.
But now going back to the Twin Towers, you have these guys talking about bombs going off. Yeah, multiple bombs, 2, 3 bombs going off, one after another. It's exactly what happens in a controlled demolition. You start from the bottom, it goes pop, 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 and then it just starts to fall. That's exactly what they're describing. That's exactly what many people were describing that day. People saying, nah, that was a bomb. People saying there was an big explosion right before it collapsed. If you slow up the video here, you could see little puffs coming out of the windows. Exactly what happens is those things are blowing and separating the already cut I-beam.
In my office on the northwest corner of the 82nd floor, I heard a noise like a sonic boom almost, and then a blast. The building swayed, shook a little bit. I saw papers coming fly out of the middle of the building, and then we went to the staircase to try to get down. We were going down. We got stuck on one floor because the door and the staircase wouldn't even open. So we went back onto the floor through some fire. We saw some fire and rubbish, and we went to the other staircase to come down. We made it all the way downstairs. And then when we were just about to come out of the building, there was another blast, and all the lights went out, and this is what happened then.
The glass came down?
We didn't see we were still inside the building. All we heard was a big blast, and the whole volume of air moved. And we came out through the subway.
No second plane. It was a bomb. Bombed in the building, not second plane. It was a bomb. Who said the second plane?
That's what we're told, the second plane. We saw it on television.
I saw everything.
All right. Thanks a lot.
And of course, they knew right away. It was Muhammad Atta. They found his passport on the street. Oh, okay. So everything in the whole plane's incinerated to dust. Everything on the screen is a fireball the size of Giant Stadium, but his passport somehow survived. I mean, they couldn't come up with something better than that. And of course, right away, it was Osama bin Laden. Never mind the fact that known truther Bill Cooper said it was either June or July of 2001 that they're going to have a major event and blame it on Osama bin Laden. Never mind that he was curiously killed in his own driveway 1 month after 9/11. Never mind the fact that the FBI director at the time was Robert Mueller, who was appointed only 1 week before the attacks, who was the person who reported on weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. You know, all you're left this hero, Robert Mueller, who then did an investigation into it that went on for years and led nowhere. Surprise, surprise. But all that aside, right now, just talking about these buildings, the only things that I can add to the conversation is that those were the strongest buildings, 2 of the strongest buildings ever built. A plane would be like paper to them. It would never even penetrate it, let alone explode 2 full floors of it. And that this is not even what a pancaking building looks like, and would never fall like this. This building was an absolute tank. So in my personal opinion, these were absolutely rigged for demolition. I remember at the time, there was one of the big things that was going around here, which you could imagine, the volume of stories around here, it got to be 1,500 times the amount of anywhere else in the country. And one of the ones that always stuck out in my mind were a lot of people who worked in the Trade Center were coming out and saying that they were like, as they were leaving at night, you know, people would be coming in, and there was just times for months at a time where they'd always see these people, these construction workers, going up to work late at night, or a lot of them, I think they were saying they looked like electricians or leckies or whatever, that whole year leading up to that. And another thing, now I don't know if anyone works in the city, well, Manhattan, I don't know about other cities, but there's always food carts on every corner. Everywhere you go, don't matter. You can get a bagel on the corner in front of your job, egg sandwich, whatever. There's always these food carts every single morning, these breakfast carts. That morning, they were all gone. They got the word that something was going to happen here. You know, Larry Silverstein canceled his meeting. Every morning he had a meeting at Windows in the World. Oh, but that day, his wife made an appointment for him to go to it was like the skin doctor or something. Yeah, right. Okay.
That particular morning, because I have light-colored hair and fair skin, and I'm an annuity to the dermatologist, my wife, God bless her, had made an appointment for me at the doctor. And I remember dressing to go to the doctor. I'm finally saying to my wife, I said, sweetheart, I've got so much to do downtown. I got to cancel this. I've got to go downtown. And she said, you're not going to cancel this appointment. You're going to the dermatologist.
So he happened to miss that meeting that he went to every single morning on that particular morning. It had also come down just before he bought those that a whole bunch of asbestos had to be removed, which was an insane amount of money. It would have been impossible. He would have had to take the buildings down or shut them down or something. And here you have a FEMA worker being interviewed about the horrors that he's helping to clean up in the city, and he states that he arrived the night before 9/11.
To be honest with you, we arrived on late Monday night and went into action on Tuesday morning. And not until today did we get a full opportunity to work the entire site.
So let's just think about this for a second. FEMA arrived in New York Monday night before the attack. This was 100% a planned attack. This guy's doing this interview on Wednesday, September 13th. He talks about arriving Monday night, goes through Tuesday, and then mentions Wednesday. So he didn't mess the days up. They were there the night before, ready for this event. What was happening in this classroom on the morning of September 11th? Well, they were having the whole class recite kite, hit, steal, plane.
Get ready. Kite. Yes, kite. Get ready. Hit. Yes, hit. Get ready. Steal. Yes, steal. Get ready. Plane. Yes, plane. Get ready. Must. Yes, must. Go to your speaker reader up from under your seat. Open your book up to lesson.
Oh, there's George Bush. And there's him getting told that the country is under attack. Right after the class recites kite, hit, steal, plane. What happened right after September 11th? They signed the Patriot Act, giving away everyone's privacy. Fun fact, the Patriot Act was actually mostly drafted by Joe Biden in 1995. So quick recap. Joe Biden is the one who drafted the Patriot Act, John Brennan is the one who approved the visas for the supposed hijackers, and Robert Mueller is the FBI director who conducted an investigation into 9/11 that led nowhere. It's funny because all I ever hear about is the Bush connections. It's almost as if they're controlled by the same people. So what else happened on September 11th? Well, the day before, Donald Rumsfeld had announced that they were missing $2.3 trillion. Well, wouldn't you know, it was the Budget Analyst's Office where they were, quote-unquote, looking for this $2.3 trillion that exploded the next day, or the flight that went down in Pennsylvania. You can see the crater right here. Well, there's the two wings. Well, what they don't tell you is that that crater was there already. The only thing that's new is the bomb hole in the middle. Finally, I'll leave you with Donald Trump's own words that day of the attack, followed by a montage of eyewitness accounts. And you could tell me whether or not this was caused by a plane crash or by planted bombs. Where we go one, we go all.
Donald, you're probably the best known builder, particularly of great buildings in the city. There's a great deal of question about whether or not the damage and the ultimate destruction of the buildings was caused by the airplanes, by architectural defect, or possibly by bombs or aftershocks. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it was an architectural defect. You know, the World Trade Center was always known as a very, very strong building. Don't forget, that took a big bomb in the basement. Now, the basement is the most vulnerable place because that's your foundation, and it withstood that. And I got to see that area about 3 or 4 days after it took place because one of my structural engineers actually took me for a tour because he did the building. And I said, I can't believe it. The building was standing solid, and half of the columns were blown out. I mean, so this was an unbelievably powerful building. If you know anything about structure, it was one of the first buildings that was built from the outside. The steel, the reason the World Trade Center had such narrow windows is that in between all the windows, you had the steel on the outside. So you had the steel on the outside of the building. That's why when I first looked, and you had big, heavy I-beams, when I first looked at it, I couldn't believe it because there was a hole in the steel. And this is steel that was, you remember the width of the windows in the World Trade Center, folks. I think you know, if you were ever up there, they were quite narrow. And in between was this heavy steel. I said, how could a plane, even a 767 or 747 or whatever it might have been, how could it possibly go through the steel? I happen to think that they had not only a plane, but they had bombs that exploded almost simultaneously, because I just can't imagine anything being able to go through that wall.
as we were getting our gear on and making our way to the stairway, there was a heavy-duty explosion.
The whole building just collapsed on us inside the lobby.
Was that a secondary explosion?
Yes, it was.
That was
Yeah, definitely a secondary explosion.
I heard a second explosion and another rumble.
An hour later than that, we had that big explosion from much, much lower.
It just went boom, it was like a bomb went off. And another explosion came right from it, just everyone flying.
There were numerous secondary explosions taking place in that building. There were continuous explosions.
No, the first explosion, and there was a second explosion in the same building. There were two explosions.
Okay. Federal agencies that were down there do believe that there was some sort of explosive device somewhere else besides the planes hitting.
There was another explosion that took place in one of the towers here. So obviously, according to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building.
There was a secondary explosion, probably a device either planted before or on the aircraft that did not explode until an hour later.
Then there was those secondary explosions and then the subsequent collapses.
That the FBI most likely thinks that there was a car or truck packed with explosives underneath the buildings, which also exploded at the same time and brought both of them down.
Now, that's the first time we're hearing that. So 2 planes and explosives that were in the building. Is that correct?
That is the working theory at this point.
I heard a noise like a sonic boom almost, and then a blast. The building swayed, shook a little bit. I saw papers fly out of the middle of the building. When we were just about to come out of the building, there was another blast, and all the lights went out, and this is what happened then.
It sounded like gunfire, bang, 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 and then all of a sudden 3 big explosions.
About 50 consecutive bangs, and it fell down like a waterfall.
And we heard the noise associated with an implosion.
We heard a very loud blast, an explosion. We looked up, and the building literally began to collapse before us.
We heard a loud explosion, and at that point, Building 2 was collapsing.
At that point, we heard a large boom. I looked up and just saw the building coming at us.
Do you know if it was an explosion or if it was a building collapse?
To me, it sounded like an explosion.
There was another major explosion. The building itself, literally the top of it came down.
All of a sudden you hear explosion, and you could see the building starting to collapse.
Huge explosion that we all heard and felt.
We understand now there has been a secondary explosion on Tower 2.
According to the Associated Press, another building that has either been attacked or exploded.
The tower, rather, that has collapsed, though we are told, collapsed because of a third explosion.
And about an hour later after that, there was a huge explosion at the base of the South Tower. That's One World Trade Center, and part of the building collapsed.
We could hear a rumble, which was about 5 seconds long, preceding the actual collapse, and then a boom when each of those towers collapsed.
Just seconds ago, there was a huge explosion, and it appears right now the Second World Trade Tower has just collapsed.
I was about 5 blocks away when I heard explosions.
And then you heard from far away, boom, boom. And you heard the boom, 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 boom.
Floor by floor, it started popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Yeah, detonated.
If they were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
From the corner, boom, 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 boom. Just like 20 straight hits. And as the bombs were going, people just started running. And I sat there and watched a few of them explode. And it just started going pop. It just started going boom, 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 boom. And he goes, how fast? I go, like firecrackers.
No second plane. It was a bomb. Bombed in all the building, not second plane. It was a bomb.
We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. And I turned to Hesh. I said, this is it. We're dead. We're not going to make it out of here.
Sad.